Hello, my name is Bernie Cocker and I'm the founder and chief executive of International Aid Trust. We are a Christian organisation bringing the practical and spiritual gospel of Jesus Christ to our hurting world. Today I want to speak to you about the medical needs that we have been able to meet around the world because of the generosity of the people here in the UK, and especially the NHS service. We send a large amount of medical aid and hospital equipment to some of the poorest nations on earth. Sometimes it's in response to a natural disaster or to help the victims of war or famine. And sometimes it's simply responding to a specific need that has been brought to our attention or that we come across on our travels. We in the UK are very fortunate that we have an health service. And I know that there are various ongoing issues within the NHS, but at least we do have doctors and nurses and surgeons. It was in the early 90s, just after International Aid Trust began in 1991, when I had my first proper taste of the poor nation's healthcare. I saw cancer patients being sent home to die because there was no treatment available for them, no palliative care. A man in his early 20s who jumped from the upper floor of an hospital block after being diagnosed with a brain tumour and being told there's no treatment available and you'll just have to go home and die and make the best of it. He was in a lot of pain. He couldn't afford the painkillers. Dr. Horace Palomar was relating this to me over lunch in a small cafe. He was a young trainee surgeon back then, in his early 20s, and he was asking me if it was at all possible to obtain some of the items of equipment for neurosurgery that he needed. And these included a craniotome, endoscope, light source, various bone cutters and other bits and pieces that I'd never heard the terminology before. We had just started eating the meal with borscht. This is Russian soup, made from red beetroot, cabbage, and whatever bits of meat they could find. And on the top they pour a little sour cream. And so you have this bowl of red and white mixture before you with bits of flesh floating in it. It tastes a lot better than it looks. Anyway, Dr. Horace continued to explain about the difficulty of operating on patients without the correct surgical instruments. It was medieval, his words. And he went on to explain the procedure of trepanning. His version of this ancient procedure was to drill 3 equidistant holes in the patient's skull with a drill and brace and bit, and then thread a wire saw through the holes, and he was going through the hand motions, and then you cut through the skull, and this allows them to cut a hatchway into the skull. This gave him access to the area of the brain he needed to operate on. And all the time he was explaining this, he was looking me in the eyes and asking me to obtain these very technical and high-value items. I was thinking, where am I going to get these from? I'll never be able to find them. This is crazy. Well, you can imagine what was going on through my head besides these impossible tasks. And I could see before me the bowl of red, white, with bits of flesh floating in it, and at the same time he's asking me for help repeatedly. And I shouted, stop. I'll get the items you need if it's the last thing I ever do. And I think part of me wanted to say that to shut him up. Well, when we got back to the office, we began chasing up suppliers in the UK, and God really touched their hearts. Every time I travelled to Ukraine, Horace was waiting for me. It didn't matter whether I arrived by plane, truck, train or car. He always seemed to know where and when I would be arriving, and he was always ready with another request. Can you get? Do you think? Is it possible? When will you know? Etc., etc. Well, we were eventually given all the equipment he needed, and this was to set up this young surgeon in his own clinic, in his own theatre, in the hospital in Ukraine's capital, Kiev, and the neurosurgery institute. And since then, he has saved hundreds upon hundreds of lives. And this very kind man also provides a free clinic every week for the people attending church. And now, more than 20 years later, he is a professor of neurosurgery teaching others. Around about the same time, I met Professor Peter Fomin, amongst other leading professionals in the health service. And Professor Peter was a senior general surgeon in all of Ukraine. He wrote about 200 papers on surgical procedures, and he was the head of Teaching Hospital number 12 in Kiev. He was a lovely, gentle and humble man. Peter took us around his hospital, explaining the lack of finances, the lack of equipment and medicines, painkillers, everything. And we were able to film whilst he was carrying out operations, not just him, but in other theatres. And it was a real sad eye-opener. It made us appreciate just what we have back in the West. One man we saw was undergoing a double hernia procedure without anaesthetic. He was lying there tied to the table, and he was told to be a big, strong Russian and not make any noise. And Peter said to him, because we have British visitors observing, and you've got to make a good impression and show them you're a big, strong Russian. And without further ado, with a little chuckle, they injected over 1 litre of saline solution into his abdomen, and it came up like a big translucent sausage, and then they began cutting into him. You never forget things like that. In the next theatre, a lady was being operated on for the 4th time for repairs, and she was just full of septicemia, and her abdomen was wide open, and her affected organs on display, and little bits of black stuff everywhere. And she was obviously in great pain and distress, and I can see her face now. And draining her abdomen with these, they look like old bits of gas piping, rubber gas piping, and these led to rubber gloves, the surgeon's gloves, and they were being used to collect the drainage bags. In a nearby room there was another man who had recently undergone a colostomy operation. His bowels had been removed, and he could not afford the $1 for the colostomy bag to collect his waste. So that poor man was being discharged from hospital with his waste now running down his thighs. He was sat in a chair just like I'm sitting in, and I can still see his face. And we have the photos of these things now. We also saw a lady who had been a major in the Russian army, and she had just been diagnosed with terminal cancer and go home to die because there was no palliative care or medication available. And she was therefore of no further use to Mother Russia. She served her purpose. She should be satisfied. We also saw a doctor with stomach cancer who had been told the same thing, and he had worked at Pripyat, the town where Chernobyl was based. He'd given everything to help the relief workers there, and now he was dying. And Professor Peter also introduced me to some of his theatre supply staff. One especially was the sister in charge of the instruments for all these 6 theatres. And she was cleaning used instruments with a nail brush under a cold water tap, ready for the next operation. They had no hot water, no autoclave, sterilizer, and nowhere near enough surgical instruments. And I couldn't believe it. But they were cheerful, and they said we were doing our best with what we have. And I told Peter that we would try to get him some help back in the UK. Not long after my return to the UK, I was struck down with acute pain in my groin, and it was so bad that I was doubled up on the floor in pain. And they sent for the emergency doctor. And the lady doctor came out, and she diagnosed renal failure, whatever that was. I didn't know at the time. And she was trying to inject me with morphine, and she called an ambulance at the same time. And all I can remember thinking was that this lady will be able to help me get some supplies. And I was telling her about the needs in Ukraine, and I had some lists of A4 under the sideboard, and I was crawling along the floor. I pulled these lists out and gave them to her, and she said, "Oh, I'll have a look. You know, the pain was so bad that I thought I would die. But the Holy Spirit told me to keep asking this lady, keep seeking, keep knocking, keep asking. And after being admitted to the New Preston Royal Infirmary, I was taken to the theatre 5 times in 3 days. I was having morphine injections 3 times a day, but still biting the mattress in agony, just lying there and with the mattress in my mouth trying to take away the pain. Anyway, each time I was taken to the theatre, there was a different theatre supply sister on duty. There were different theatres sometimes, 3 different theatres. So I was able to share with them all about the terrible needs in Ukraine hospitals. And I kept asking and asking. The result was that they donated a huge amount of redundant theatre supplies from the old hospital, which was in storage. There were instruments of every description, autoclaves, suction pumps, anaesthetic machines, vital sign monitors, and even bedding. God does work in strange ways to work his purpose out, you know. And if we take notice, he'll use these things. And at the same time, following weeks, we obtained a large amount of colostomy supplies from a company who produced the items in Ireland, Southern Ireland. And since then, we have sent out medical and surgical aid all over the world. We've set up many successful projects, including the following that I can remember. We've fit out an adult AIDS hospital with beds and mattresses and all other types of apparatus for 50 patients, washable mattresses, etc., etc. We've helped with a children's AIDS hospital. We've fit out a breast cancer ward. We've completely fitted out an eye theatre with all the equipment in Tanzania, working with an Anglican retired bishop. We fit out a premature baby unit in Odessa, Ukraine, and that cost us £1,500 with the equipment given from Lancaster and Preston hospitals, and we've shipped it out and had them fitted. And it was just incredible to see these children being saved, these babies being saved. We fitted out several wards in a ruined hospital in Nigeria, the maternity ward, the pre-delivery room, the children's ward. We've provided all the diagnostic equipment for a children's leukemia hospital. We've supplied a container of medical equipment to Bishkek in Kurdistan, Afghanistan even. And we've worked with local Rotary clubs and supplied a full load of hospital equipment to Banjul, Gambia. Sent loads of equipment out to the hospitals in Africa. We sent millions of pounds worth of medicines and vitamins worldwide, plus lots of other relief efforts to many parts of the world, including the desperately poor situation in Sierra Leone during the Ebola crisis. We've set up wards there. Oh, it's just incredible. We've worked in Albania, Belarus, etc., etc. And you know, Jesus said the poor will be with you always, but it doesn't mean to say we haven't to help. And because we are Christians, we have to do the work of Christ. And we sometimes think things are too difficult for us, and when we think like that, that's if we think nothing, that's what we'll get, nothing. But we give all the praise to God. In Ephesians 3:20, Paul says, "Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is in work with us, we give all the praise and glory through Jesus Christ." Amen. Thank you for everyone who's helped us in the past. We're still doing this. We sent out 3 containers this week, and we're preaching the practical and spiritual gospel worldwide. Come and join us. God bless you all.